Right now, at this very moment, the world is watching Greenland, the largest island on Earth, a place so remote, so frozen that only 56,000 people call it home, but three superpowers want it: the United States, Russia, China, and for the first time in modern history, an American president is openly threatening to take it by force. This isn't just about ice and rock, this is about DNA, about Viking blood that still flows through Greenlandic veins, about an identity forged over 1,000 years, and about whether the genetic legacy of the Norse explorers will be erased by American ambition. This is the story of Greenland, the Viking territory that could end NATO. The year is 985. A violent, red-bearded Norseman named Erik Thorvaldsson stands trial in Iceland. He's killed 2 men. The punishment? Exile. But Erik the Red, as history would remember him, doesn't run away in shame. He sails west into the unknown, and there, beyond the mist and ice, he discovers a land so vast it would dwarf any Viking territory ever claimed. He names it Greenland. A marketing trick, some say. Make it sound pleasant, and people will follow. And they did follow. Within 15 years, Erik had established 2 major settlements: the eastern settlement near modern-day Qaqortoq, the western settlement near Nuuk, where Greenland's capital stands today. At their peak, these Norse colonies housed 4,000 Vikings. Think about that. 4,000 Scandinavians, living on the edge of the Arctic, raising cattle and sheep, building churches from stone and turf, maintaining their language and culture 1,000 miles from home. These weren't just temporary camps. The Norse built over 400 farms. They constructed 16 churches, including a cathedral at Gardar. They traded walrus ivory back to Europe, a commodity so valuable it rivaled African elephant ivory. Archaeological evidence shows they lived well, at least initially. They brought European livestock. They grew barley in the short summers. They hunted seals and caribou. They maintained their Norse traditions, their thing assemblies, their legal codes. Their DNA is still there. Modern genetic studies show that approximately 20% of Greenlandic DNA comes from Scandinavian ancestry, Viking blood, diluted but unbroken, flowing through veins in Nuuk and Ilulissat and every settlement across the coast. But here's the mystery that haunts historians. By 1450, the Norse were gone, completely, vanished without a trace. Was it climate change? The medieval warm period ended around 1300 AD, and brutal cold returned. The Little Ice Age began. Their cattle couldn't survive the extended winters. Their crops failed year after year. Was it the Thule people, the ancestors of modern Inuit, migrating from Canada around 1300, competing for the same hunting grounds? They had superior cold weather technology, kayaks, toggle-headed harpoons, skin clothing that kept them warmer than Norse wool. Or did the Norse simply refuse to adapt? Historians note they never adopted Inuit survival techniques. They clung to their European farming methods even as the climate made farming impossible. Pride killed them. Some scholars believe they simply gave up, abandoned their farms, sailed back to Iceland and Norway, leaving behind only ruins. We may never know for certain, but their genetic legacy remained, mixed into the population that would eventually call themselves Kalalit, Greenlanders. If you sequence the DNA of a modern Greenlander, you're seeing a story written in genes. 80% comes from the Fuel people, the Inuit ancestors who crossed from Canada around 1300 AD. Their genetics show remarkable adaptation to Arctic life, higher metabolic rates, bodies designed to process marine mammal fats, genetic variants that allow them to maintain body temperature in extreme cold, DNA that literally evolved for survival in the harshest climate on Earth. Studies of Greenlandic Inuit genetics have revealed fascinating adaptations. Variants in the CPT1A gene affect how the body metabolizes fat. Variations in the TBX15 gene influence body fat distribution and cold tolerance. These aren't just minor differences. These are evolutionary adaptations that made survival possible where Europeans failed. 20% is European, mostly Danish, from 3 centuries of colonial rule, but also that ancient Norse DNA, still detectable, still present in specific genetic markers that trace back to Scandinavian populations. This makes Greenlanders genetically unique. They're not simply Inuit, they're not Scandinavian, they're a distinct population forged in ice, carrying the heritage of two waves of colonization separated by 300 years. Denmark formally colonized Greenland in 1721. The Danish and Norwegian crown claimed it, converted the population to Christianity, and began a process of cultural assimilation that would last until the 20th century. Hans Egede, a Norwegian-Danish missionary, established the first permanent Danish settlement at what would become Nuuk. He came to convert the Norse settlers he believed still lived there. When he found only Inuit people, he converted them instead. For most Greenlanders, Danish ancestry comes from this colonial period. Administrators, traders, missionaries, whalers, their DNA mixing with the indigenous population generation after generation. The Danish government, for centuries, treated Greenland as a colony to be exploited. They restricted Greenlanders' movements, forbade them from owning land, imposed Danish language and education, forcibly relocated entire communities to consolidate control. It wasn't until 1979 that Greenland gained home rule, and even then, Denmark retained control over foreign affairs, defence, and monetary policy. But here's what's crucial to understand. Despite centuries of Danish rule, despite that 20% European DNA, Greenlanders don't identify as European. They identify as Kalalit, as indigenous Arctic people, as the descendants of those who survived when the Vikings couldn't. Their language is Kalaallisut, not Danish. Their culture centres on hunting and fishing, not European traditions. Their genetic identity is fundamentally indigenous, with European DNA as a historical footnote, a reminder of colonisation, not a source of pride. This matters, because right now, the world's most powerful nation is trying to erase that identity entirely. Let's talk about why superpowers can't leave Greenland alone. This isn't new. America has wanted Greenland for almost a century. In 1946, just after World War II, President Harry Truman secretly offered Denmark $100 million in gold to buy Greenland outright. The Danes refused. But the episode shows how long this obsession has existed. During World War II, Nazi Germany invaded Denmark in hours. Denmark couldn't protect Greenland, so the United States stepped in, built air bases, monitored the North Atlantic for German submarines, turned Greenland into a strategic fortress. Those bases weren't temporary. When the war ended, America didn't leave. In 1951, the US and Denmark signed a brisk defense agreement. America could maintain military bases. In exchange, Denmark kept nominal sovereignty. That base is still there. Patuffik Space Base, formerly Fulla Air Base. During its construction in the 1950s, the US forcibly relocated an entire Inuit community, promising they could return. They never did. It remains a bitter memory for Greenlanders. Today, Patuffik is one of the most important early warning radar stations in the American missile defense network. If Russia launches ICBMs over the Arctic, Patuffik sees them first. The base houses ballistic missile warning systems and satellite tracking stations. It's absolutely critical to American defense strategy. But that's not why Trump wants Greenland. Not really. Rare earth minerals? That's the real prize. Greenland sits on massive deposits of rare earth elements: neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, europium. These aren't household names, but they're essential for modern technology. Electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, smartphone screens, military guidance systems, precision weaponry. China currently controls 90% of the global rare earth supply. They've weaponized this monopoly multiple times, threatening to cut off exports during trade disputes with the United States, Japan, and other nations. Greenland could break that monopoly. Geologists estimate the island contains some of the world's largest untapped reserves. The Kvenefjeld deposit alone could supply rare earth elements for decades. But here's the problem. Actually mining these minerals is incredibly difficult. The terrain is mountainous and remote. There's almost no infrastructure. Roads don't exist between most settlements. Environmental regulations are strict because mining threatens the pristine Arctic ecosystem, and the permafrost, while melting, still makes large-scale extraction technically challenging and economically questionable. Still, the potential is enormous. Some estimates suggest trillions of dollars in mineral wealth, if it can be extracted profitably. Then there's the Arctic itself. Climate change is fundamentally reshaping global trade routes. The Northern Sea route along Russia's coast is becoming navigable for longer periods each year. A northwest passage through Canadian Arctic waters is opening up. Routes through Greenland's territorial waters could cut weeks off journeys between Europe and Asia. By 2050, some projections suggest the Arctic could be ice-free in summer. That means year-round shipping through the top of the world. Whoever controls key choke points controls global trade. Greenland sits at the centre of all this. Control Greenland, and you control access to North American Arctic waters. You control missile detection over the North Pole. You control potential shipping lanes worth hundreds of billions annually. That's why Russia has increased naval patrols off the coast, why China has invested in Greenland's mining industry and offered to finance airport construction, why Trump says Denmark can't adequately defend the island. From a pure strategic standpoint, he's not wrong. Denmark's entire active military is smaller than the New York City Police Department. They have no capacity to stop Russian or Chinese incursions without American support. But claiming Greenland by force, that's something else entirely. This isn't about ice. It's about the strategic DNA of 21st century power, and 56,000 indigenous people are standing in the way. So where does this leave the 56,000 people who actually live there? Trapped. That's where. Recent polling shows approximately 70% of Greenlanders oppose joining the United States. They don't want to be American. They don't want their indigenous identity absorbed into the world's largest superpower. But they also increasingly want independence from Denmark. A 2023 survey found that 68% of Greenlanders support eventual independence. They're tired of being a Danish territory, tired of Copenhagen making decisions about their land, tired of being treated as perpetual children who need European guardianship. Here's the cruel irony. Greenland can't afford independence. The island receives approximately $500 million annually in subsidies from Denmark. That's more than a quarter of Greenland's entire economy. Without it, schools close, hospitals shut down, infrastructure crumbles, the government goes bankrupt. Greenland's economy depends on fishing, which employs about 10% of the population. Tourism brings in some revenue, but there's not enough economic activity to sustain independence. Not yet. So they're stuck. Too dependent on Denmark to leave, too proud of their indigenous heritage to accept continued colonization, and now facing American annexation. And now reports are emerging that the Trump administration is considering a direct payment to every Greenlander, somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000 per person. Do the math. At $100,000 per person, that's $5.7 billion. For the United States, that's barely a rounding error in the defense budget. For individual Greenlanders, it's transformative wealth. It's a bribe. Call it what it is. Pay the population to abandon their identity, to give up sovereignty, to become American. Some Greenlanders might take it. $100,000 is life-changing money in an economy where the average annual income is around $50,000. It could pay off debts, buy a home, fund education, escape poverty. But money doesn't change DNA. It doesn't erase 1,000 years of history. It doesn't make indigenous people suddenly European or American. The leader of Greenland, Mute Borup Egede, has been unequivocal. Quote, "Greenland is ours. We are not for sale and will never be for sale. We must not lose our long struggle for freedom." Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been even more direct. If the United States uses military force against Greenland, NATO ends. The alliance that has guaranteed European security since 1949 collapses. Think about what that means. The United States invading a NATO ally. Article 5 of the NATO treaty states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. But what happens when the attacker is the alliance's most powerful member? Europeans watching American troops occupy Danish territory. Germany, France, Poland, all forced to choose between their security guarantor and a founding member of the alliance. The entire post-war order shattering because one president wants minerals and strategic positioning. Denmark sent 43 soldiers to die in Afghanistan supporting American wars. 7 more died in Iraq. They answered Article 5 when America invoked it after September 11th, and now America is threatening to invade their territory. The betrayal would be absolute. NATO wouldn't survive it. Europe would have to build its own defense structure, independent of the United States. Russia would celebrate as the Western alliance tears itself apart. Meanwhile, Greenlandic protesters have taken to the streets of Nuuk, holding signs that read, "We are not for sale," demanding that the world recognize their right to self-determination. They're watching their fate being decided by powers in Washington and Copenhagen, powers that see them as obstacles, not people, as genetic anomalies standing in the way of strategic interests. Viking DNA mixed with indigenous genes, American ambition colliding with Danish sovereignty and Greenlandic independence. 56,000 people whose genetic heritage spans a millennium, caught between empires that see them only as impediments to power. Erik the Red sailed west to escape violence. He found a land harsh enough to forge a new people, a population genetically unique, culturally distinct, fiercely independent. His Norse descendants failed, the climate defeated them, their refusal to adapt killed them. They vanished into history, leaving only ruins and DNA. But the Ful people survived. They became the Kalaallit. They adapted where the Vikings couldn't. They endured Danish colonization while maintaining their identity. And now they face the ultimate test. Now, 1100 years after Erik the Red first stepped onto Greenlandic shores, that hard-won independence hangs by a thread. The question isn't whether America has the military power to take Greenland. It does. The question isn't whether rare earth minerals and Arctic shipping lanes are strategically valuable. They are. The question is whether the genetic and cultural identity of an entire people will be erased by the strategic calculations of superpowers who view them as bargaining chips in a game they never asked to play. History suggests they will be. The Vikings vanished. Colonial powers always win. Indigenous peoples always lose when empires decide their land is valuable. But Greenland's DNA tells a different story. It says some peoples survive when others can't. That adaptation isn't just genetic. It's cultural. It's spiritual. It's the refusal to disappear even when the powerful demand it. The Thule people watched the Vikings die. They survived. They mixed with the Norse DNA that remained. They endured Danish colonization. And now they're staring down American annexation. Erik the Red's blood still flows in Greenland. But so does the blood of the people who were strong enough to survive when his descendants couldn't. The world is watching Greenland, and Greenlanders are watching back, waiting to see if their 1,000-year story of survival ends with a bribe and a military occupation, or if somehow the descendants of both Vikings and Thule people can do what neither could alone. Remain free. This is Epic Chronicles, where DNA tells the story that politics tries to hide. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe